This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and let's get right to it because we've got a guy whose book in 2016 really changed the nature of the 2016 presidential election. Of course, the New York Times bestseller Clinton Cash is the book I'm referring to. We're still litigating and talking about the cases, the business dealings that Peter Schweizer documented in Clinton Cash. Think, for example, Uranium One. We're still asking questions, the American people still asking questions about whether federal law enforcement will start getting answers to some of the questions that were raised in Peter Schweizer's book. He's got a new book out that's equally compelling, and it's bipartisan in nature, the political ruling class. It's called Secret Empires, How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends. And there are some particularly interesting stories of business dealings from some household names in politics, how you go in with a certain amount of cash and you come out of office with exponentially more, or even you continue to accrue it while in office and it goes largely unreported, but not by Peter Schweizer. Also, he's got a very interesting case study that's particularly relevant to Illinois, and we'll start there. Peter Schweizer, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's great to be back on with you. Thanks for having me.
Really fascinated by your book. This is some really good reporting, investigating and then reporting and translating it into a format that's very accessible. I want to start with a real estate mogul goes to Washington, and we're not talking about Trump. We're talking about Penny Pritzker. And as you undoubtedly know, Peter, we've got another heir to the Hyatt fortune running for office in Illinois named J.B. Pritzker. And so Penny's experience as Secretary of Commerce and her relationship with Barack Obama, it couldn't be more timely for our gubernatorial election this year. But help us distill how Penny Pritzker advanced her family's financial interests and her financial interests throughout the rise of Barack Obama and then including when she was Secretary of Commerce.
Well, I tell you, it's a mass of conflicts of interest and the sort of things that I think, if Trump were to engage in, there would be massive outrage. That's not to say that we shouldn't watch what Trump's doing, but in the case of Pritzker, it was so overt and obvious. Just pick a very simple one. She started a real estate investment firm, PSP, while she was in Washington, D.C. in the Obama administration, and one of their key business fixtures was leasing office properties to the federal government, including the Commerce Department when she was Commerce Secretary. That's a huge conflict of interest. Some of the real estate investments, buildings that she purchased while she was Secretary of Commerce were then leased by entities like the National League of Cities, National League of Counties, who are actively lobbying the Commerce Department and who are also receiving grants from the Commerce Department. So, this is ethics 101. You have these tentacles of financial ties and government power that overlapped that really went largely undetected during her tenure as Commerce Secretary.
The other thing about this, though, too, is this whole big show that politicians, particularly those that come to the table with a lot of wealth, like Penny Pritzker did, make of divesting themselves from their financial interests. You report that really it was a little bit of kind of press release politics. It was a show of divesting from some companies that were not as material to her financial interests as the big ones.
That's exactly right. And I mean, then there were just really simple, breaches of what I would regard as the ethical code. I mean, for example, one of the things that was claimed in her ethics filings was that she was not going to be involved at all with her businesses. She was going to have an arm's length relationship and not manage it. And yet there are accounts of her as Commerce Secretary going and having brown bag lunches at the companies that she was supposed to be having nothing to do with. Conducting meetings and seminars and things actually at those companies. Another overt thing that was very troubling while she's Commerce Secretary, her company, PSP, actually gets the head of the real estate arm of the federal government's General Services Administration to quit his job and to come work for her. again, raising all kinds of questions. So, this is a problem and an issue, certainly in the era of Trump, but it didn't start with Trump. And the bottom line is we have to sort of get rid of the notion that people that are very wealthy are not going to be interested in cutting corners while they're in office.
Absolutely.
It's ultimately not an issue. It's ultimately not an issue of money. They don't do it because of the money. They do it because they feel entitled. They do it because they think they can get away with it, and they do it because they think the rules shouldn't apply to them. Just because somebody has money doesn't mean that they're not going to do things to cut corners and violate ethics rules.
Such a great point. Such a great point.
True. And J.B. Pritzker was jealous that his sister Penny rose to the level of, Secretary of Commerce. But what other friends did President Barack Obama help out?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's a friend that a lot of people in the country don't know. He's a little bit better known in Chicago, named Marty Nesbitt.
Oh, yeah.
And so when Barack Obama is reelected in 2012, Marty Nesbitt starts an investment fund called Vistria. And it says in the corporate documents, the purpose of Vistria is to invest in, quote unquote, highly regulated industries. Now, that's a great business model if you happen to be best friends with the regulator in chief, which would be the president of the United States. And what you find with Vistria, you find it with other entities as well, of people that are close to Barack Obama, that they engage in what I call smash and grab. Barack Obama would go in and smash a company, declare that for one reason or another he didn't think it's a good company that's serving customers well, smash it with regulation. That would drive down the valuations of that company to pennies on the dollar, and then a friend would swoop in and buy it on the cheap, only to then have the regulatory weight lifted. And in the case of Marty Nesbitt and Vistria, the classic example here is the University of Phoenix, which is a for-profit college. The Obama administration said, we don't like this school, so we're going to not allow the Pentagon to use GI Bill money to let soldiers attend that school. You can imagine what happened to the stock price. It went from something like $100 a share down to about $3 a share, at which point Marty Nesbitt swooped in and bought it for pennies on the dollar. Only after that did the Obama administration say, you know what, we think that we will allow GI dollars to flow back to that school.
Criminal.
And you see that pattern.
Yeah.
You see that pattern over and over again.
And even when they don't come in and swoop in to buy it outright, they come in as consultants to help fix it, to get regulatory relief from. I mean, so it's the same. That's just like that trick is as old as Chicago lobbyists. But I mean, it's great to document specific examples of this. I also want to get to this story. Tell us the story of Scranton Joe, his son Hunter Biden, and John Kerry's stepson Christopher Hines get together and partner with a Ukrainian natural gas company.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I call the book Secret Empires, is that a guy like Joe Biden will say, well, my family doesn't have any money. Look at my financial disclosure. But what's done is the deals are funneled through your adult kids, and you don't have to disclose the assets and income of your adult kids. So in the case of Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden and Chris Hines and a guy named Devin Archer, who is a longtime Kerry aide, they're doing deals with people from Ukraine to China. In the case of Ukraine, there's an oligarch named Igor Kolomoisky, who is a notorious oligarch. Now, if you know anything about Ukraine, oligarchs can be bad enough, but if you are the most notorious of the oligarchs, that's saying something. And that's who Igor Kolomoisky is. This guy puts Hunter Biden on the payroll of his energy company to help him on compliance matters, whatever that means. And we, of course, don't know how much he made, but you can imagine it was a pretty penny for, Hunter Biden to take a job like this. But here's where it gets interesting. So Kolomoisky, among owning an energy company, also owns a bank. Joe Biden, Hunter's father, the vice president of the United States, is responsible for the flow of U.S. aid dollars to the Ukraine. That aid is funneled through Privat Bank, which is owned by Kolomoisky, who, again, is paying Hunter Biden large sums of money. U.S. taxpayer dollars disappear in Kolomoisky's bank, more than $1 billion. And a lot of people in the Ukraine believe that Kolomoisky himself siphoned that money off. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Donald Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017, in the last days of the Obama administration, where was Joe Biden? He wasn't in Washington, D.C. He wasn't in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He was in the Ukraine, and he was working to eliminate an investigation of Igor Kolomoisky, who, of course, is the oligarch that was paying his son.
Unbelievable.
So it's dirty, dirty stuff.
So
Dirty
the vice president's son, at the time he's vice president, the Secretary of State's son, at least in part at the time that he was Secretary of State, stepson, John Kerry, and they're in bed with this Ukrainian, corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs and sending billions of dollars of American money, taxpayer money, to cement the relationship. I mean, this is the kind of remarkable stuff in this book. People, you almost think this is like a John le Carré novel, but it's not, and it's well documented. I want to get to another example here. Let's go to the Republican side. Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao, of course, a cabinet secretary before, a cabinet secretary again, and how their net worth has gone from as little as $3 million 15 years ago to as much as $36.5 million today.
How did that happen?
Well, part of it, I know, is Elaine Chao comes from Wealth, a family shipping company, but connect the dots for us on that explosion in net worth.
Yeah, I mean, China figures large in this book because China has basically embarked on a strategy, and they'll say this openly, a strategy of seeking favors with American political leaders by doing lucrative deals with their families. And that's certainly the case with Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, as you said, married to Elaine Chao, the transportation secretary in the Trump administration. Her father launched a shipping business, but the shipping business didn't really take off until 1993, when then-Senator Mitch McConnell, who had just married Elaine, and his father-in-law go to Beijing, China. The trip is not an official government trip. It's not a Senate delegation. They are there as guests of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, CSSC, which, as the name implied, is wholly owned by the Chinese government. And they basically say to McConnell and Chao, we will set you up in a major way in the shipping business. We will build your ships. We will finance the construction of those ships. We will provide crews for those ships. We will provide contracts for you to ship government-owned companies' goods around the Pacific. And they say they're in. And, of course, the rest is history. They make a fortune. The relationship is so close between this family and the Chinese government that Elaine Chao's father and sister joined the board of directors of CSSC Holdings, which is one of the largest military contractors in Beijing, China. And so they're getting rich courtesy of the help of the Chinese government. Mitch McConnell's Senate career, something very interesting happens. He was a very critical voice against China when it came to human rights, military expansion, trade issues. Then when the deal was struck, he started to change. And today, he nary has a bad word to say about the Chinese government. And I would argue it's because he precisely knows that the family's fortunes are tied up with the good graces of the Chinese government. And that net worth increase you talked about comes almost entirely because James Chao, the father-in-law, a couple of years ago, made a gift of between $5 million and $25 million to Senator Mitch McConnell. So, who wouldn't wish to have in-laws like that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and McConnell's been very skeptical openly of Trump's, trade policy with respect to China. And the point is, even if Mitch McConnell was a free marketeer, it doesn't matter because of this relationship and his financial interests. He's hopelessly conflicted in his pronouncements in this area. I mean, this is why this is so great. But we don't have time to get to the princelings of Chicago and Mayor Daley, former Mayor Daley's deals with the Russians and the Chinese, which is why you need to get this book, Secret Empires: How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends. This is just great stuff, important stuff. Peter Schweizer, the author of Clinton Cash, is the author of this book. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.